Dzień dobry, Tomek Jurgielewicz. Zakładam, że Państwo mnie słyszycie. Chciałbym tylko prosić o krótkie potwierdzenie na czacie, że wszystko jest OK. OK. Hello, Thomas.
Hello, good morning. Can you hear me?
Morning. Do I have a problem with headphones?
Thomas. I can hear you fine.
Great. It's my issues here. Hello, Thomas. Dzień dobry Państwu. Thomas, I will start in Polish for a moment to our Polish audience and for all of people who are willing to hear Thomas' speech in English. I will just tell you that my part will take about 20 minutes, and after 20 minutes, Thomas in English will go in details with Biolock. Więc dziękuję Państwu za obecność. Spora grupa użytkowników, po raz kolejny nas to bardzo cieszy. Dzisiaj będziemy mówili o sposobie, w jaki można zabezpieczyć dane w SAP przez możliwość wyboru sposobu autentykacji. Na samym początku wprowadzenie odnośnie tego, w jaki sposób możecie Państwo używać nasz pokój webinarowy. Na górze for all of those who want to change language, please click on the top right icon that I highlighted in my presentation. I dla Państwa informacja, jeśli będziecie chcieli użyć czatu, proszę o wprowadzenie, proszę o użycie w dolnej części czatu. Jesteśmy otwarci w każdym momencie na Państwa pytania, więc zapraszam też wręcz do przerywania naszych prezentacji. Okay. Agenda wygląda dość prosto, ponieważ mamy dwa elementy, może trzy. Przez 20 minut opowiem o wprowadzeniu do zagadnienia. W drugiej części Tomasz przekaże większe szczegóły, łącznie z use case'ami w SAP-ie, w jaki sposób można wykorzystywać biometrię do wsparcia procesów, czy to GRC, czy rozliczeń finansowych, czy do na przykład ukrycia danych, które nie muszą być szczególnie pokazane każdym autoryzowanym osobom. Ostatnia część to jest sesja pytań i odpowiedzi, natomiast tak jak wspomniałem, jeśli pojawią się jakiekolwiek pytania, proszę te pytania zadawać, bez względu na to, czy po polsku, czy po angielsku. Poradzimy sobie z tłumaczeniem w obie strony, jeśli będzie taka potrzeba. Okay. Dwa słowa jeszcze odnośnie LUKARDI. Jesteśmy partnerem Biolocka, natomiast samym security w SAP-ie zajmujemy się od 2015 roku i dostarczamy takie ekspertyzy jak projekty reorganizacji ról i uprawnień. Organizujemy procesy GRC w SAP-ie w oparciu o kontrolę konfliktów uprawnień, o compliance. Prowadzimy audyty bezpieczeństwa, wprowadzamy organizacje w to, żeby mogły skutecznie i wręcz w czasie rzeczywistym monitorować bezpieczeństwo SAP-a. Dodatkowo, patrząc przez pryzmat autoryzacji, też widzimy potrzebę optymalizacji licencji SAP, co jest samym zagadnieniem samym w sobie. I na samym końcu, last but not least, biometria w SAP-ie, czyli taki element, który z naszej perspektywy wydaje się mocno interesujący, stąd też obecność dzisiaj Tomasza. Zacznę od takiego krótkiego wprowadzenia, które dotyczy, myślę, każdego z nas, nie tylko w kontekście SAP, ponieważ jakbyśmy się cofnęli do 1962 roku, tu mają Państwo obrazek takiego komputera IBM 709. Na tym komputerze był stworzony i zainstalowany pierwszy system operacyjny, który działał w oparciu o login i hasła. Potężna na ówczesne czasy moc obliczeniowa i pierwsza w historii użycie loginu i haseł do tego, żeby dostać się do swoich danych. Dzisiaj mamy praktycznie 60 lat później i co się zmieniło? Gabaryty naszego sprzętu znacznie się zmieniły. Mamy w kieszeni telefon, którego moc obliczeniowa jest dużo większa niż ta moc obliczeniowa, która pozwoliła ludziom wylądować na Księżycu. Natomiast i wtedy, i teraz używamy dokładnie tego samego archaicznego sposobu autentykacji w oparciu o login i hasło. Zmieniło się dużo w technologii odnośnie samej koncepcji podejścia do zagadnienia. Jesteśmy ciągle praktycznie w tym samym miejscu. Warto też spojrzeć na SAP-a, ponieważ SAP istnieje od 1972 roku i ciągle jest obecny dokładnie ten sam mechanizm, bez względu na to, czy jesteśmy w starym, może nie bardzo starym CC, czy w obecnym S4HANA, czy w jakikolwiek inny sposób autentykujemy się do SAP-a. Bazuje to wszystko na koncepcji login i hasło. Na co jeszcze zwrócić należy uwagę, login, hasło często wystarczą do tego, żeby dostać się do tych najważniejszych danych finansowych, magazynowych, największych biznesów na świecie. Jedna taka, na samym początku, jak poznałem zagadnienie biometrii, przypomniały mi się takie use case'y, które można by skwitować takim jednym krótkim zdaniem: to nie ja, to kto i o co chodzi. Takie przypadki jak realizacja przelewów. Ktoś zrobił jakiś przelew na jakąś kwotę i osoba, albo użytkownik, albo osoba, która była właścicielem tego użytkownika, który zrobiła dany przelew, wypierała się realizacji tegoż przelewu. Czy możemy potwierdzić w jakikolwiek sposób, że ktoś się podszył pod użytkownika? Inny przypadek. Administrator, który rozstał się z organizacją, zostawił w serwerach taką bombę logiczną, która została uruchomiona po wielu miesiącach od jego odejścia. Za pomocą inżynierii wstecznej i forenzyk analizys można było dojść do tego, jaki użytkownik w rzeczywistości zostawił tą bombę logiczną. Natomiast organizacja nie była w stanie rzeczywiście potwierdzić, czy dana osoba rzeczywiście używała tego użytkownika w swoich aktywnościach. Dalej mamy takie zagadnienia jak przekazywanie haseł, przekazywanie bądź podglądanie. Natomiast przekazywanie dotyczy na przykład takich sytuacji, w których mamy do czynienia z wielkimi magazynami, halami magazynowymi, gdzie mamy komputery, które wykorzystuje wiele osób. Czasem ktoś zapomni się wylogować, czasem ktoś specjalnie poprosi inną osobę o to, żeby można było szybciej wykonać jakąś aktywność, więc tracimy cały impact związany z bezpieczeństwem dostępu i potwierdzeniem w rzeczywistości, że dana aktywność została wykonana przez daną fizycznie osobę. Kilka takich krótkich use case'ów Tomasz pokaże w większych szczegółach te zagadnienia, natomiast dla tych z Państwa, którzy obserwowali w ostatnim czasie LinkedIna, zwrócę tylko uwagę przywołam te przykłady, o których też wspominaliśmy. I jesteśmy w stanie wykorzystać biometrię do tego, żeby wesprzeć compliance w kontekście potwierdzenia płatności, na przykład w oparciu o to, że ustawiamy sobie limit płatności, powyżej której musimy zautentykować osobę za pomocą biometrii, czy to linii papilarnych, czy za pomocą jakichś innych narzędzi, o których też Tomasz będzie mówił. To jest przykład takiego screena, który pokazuje możliwość inicjalnego skonfigurowania takiego procesu. Drugi przykład, przyspieszenie pracy w oparciu o SAP Digital Signature, czyli sposobu podpisywania dokumentów, gdzie jesteśmy w stanie zaprząc biometrię po to, żebyśmy byli w stanie raz usprawnić pracę, a dwa rzeczywiście potwierdzić sobie stan faktyczny, jakim jest konkretna osoba podpisująca się w imieniu jakiegoś użytkownika. Dalej mamy scenariusze, które pozwalają nam na przykład ukrywanie części informacji po to, żeby być zgodny z RODO, żeby nie pokazywać wszystkich informacji od razu w każdym momencie. I to są tego typu przykłady, które pokazują nam moc, na skalę użycia tych rozwiązań biometrycznych. To znaczy jest cała masa, z Tomaszem też przygotowaliśmy takie różne scenariusze użycia, gdzie jesteśmy w stanie zaprząc biometrię do rozwiązań szeregu różnych wyzwań związanych z tym, czy rzeczywiście dana osoba jest tą, która używa danego użytkownika. To jest koniec tej części pierwszej, troszeczkę szybciej niż 20 minut. Right now I will switch into English and hand over presentation to Tomasz. As I described, if there is any question, please ask even in Polish. We could translate it into English when it is needed. Okay? Tomasz?
Thank you, sir. Can you hear me? I'm trying to share my screen now here.
I can hear you.
Let's see, is this the right screen? Let me know when you can see the screen. Good. Then let's jump right in. Today's presentation is about the checking ID in SAP and of course in S/4HANA using biometrics. And that is very important to point out because SAP themselves and other vendors are talking a lot about identity management. And I want to point out before we even get started that without biometrics, there is no identity management, since you're never identifying the actual user. But let's discuss why we are even talking about biometrics, because without it, you never know who is behind the keyboard. You have no idea who is really logging on to SAP. You do not know who is using an administrator profile. You don't know who's creating a purchase order or issuing a wire transfer. And now with COVID, you for sure don't know who is really behind the computer in the home office. And that results in fraud. We generally, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but we have, every company has about 5% of their revenue goes away to fraud. And Gartner recently issued an article reiterating that 80% of security breaches are caused by weak or reused passwords. And then more important, one stolen password took down the Colonial pipeline earlier this year here in the United States. We were personally affected and out of gas. And it was called an ATO, an account takeover, that cost the company $2 million in ransomware and set off the largest supply chain issue in recent history. Now, when we're talking about fraud, we're not saying that all your employees commit fraud. What we are saying is you need to protect against that one bad apple that generally has been with the company for a very long time, and then one trigger turns that person into doing something that you wouldn't expect the person to do. One of our recent cases here in the US was a nun who actually almost stole $1 million from a Catholic elementary school. But the more important part from this story was that fraud is always detected when something changes. In this case, the change was that the nun retired. So it took until her retirement until the fraud was discovered that she had done for many, many years. Which leads me to this slide. 79% of companies saw an increase of fraud due to COVID. And it had nothing to do with COVID. The part of COVID was that everything changed and fraud was discovered. And of course, 90% of companies expect fraud to increase because everybody was somehow impacted by COVID. And SAP and the DHS confirmed that. They have actually issued warnings specifically to companies that SAP systems are being targeted. But let's talk about what the common denominator for fraud is. Very simple. You might remember many years ago, Jérôme Kerviel caused 5 billion, not million, damages in France at the bank. And he stole computer passwords for months and used them to try to recover the funds that he had lost. Edward Snowden, on this side of the world, caused the largest breach in NSA history. And he was just a contractor at the government, not even a government employee. And he asked 20 co-workers to hand over their password so he could do his job and as an administrator. But really what he did was he extracted the data. So the ATO, the account takeover, is the overlooked and ignored security challenge, not only in SAP, in any IT system, but since we're focusing on SAP, the employees share the passwords, hacker hack SAP user credentials, the secretaries have executive passwords, and with thousands of SAP roles, all users are generally very over-permitted. So there are a lot of reasons. And then the latest one that we've seen, especially on this side here, but also in Europe, the ransomware attackers, they actually started sharing logon credentials on the dark web after the ransomware had not been paid. So let's focus on why Biolock. Our company, Real-Time, has actually been around SAP since 1986, 35 years. We have a lot of SAP expertise. In 20 years, a customer from the food industry came to us and said, hey, everybody is sharing passwords, logging on with other users. What can you do? And if you can still see my video here, this is a Siemens ID mouse. This was the first biometric device that you could plug into a PC. And we took this in 2001 and built a custom application for the customer that was first certified by SAP March 1st, 2002, 19 and a half years ago, and is still the only certified biometric technology for SAP. Since then, I have been in charge of the international promotion and distribution. We have done global partnerships with Fujitsu. The technology is installed in all continents, and I have actually presented personally in all continents but Australia. But what we want to talk about is that there is basic SAP security, and that is not good enough. We basically compare it to this black fence here, which is great. It will keep some honest people out. But if somebody had bad intention and comes in an American SUV, they drive right through that fence. And that is why you see in Washington, D.C., especially after 9/11 and now after January 6th, every important road has this thing popping out of the ground, which we refer to as advanced Biolock security, which really is an additional security layer that sits on top of your SAP security layer to protect it, just like this metal gate was protecting the original fence. And it is best described with a hotel room. When you check in a hotel, you get a key card, and the key card has access to your room, and you know that everybody in that hotel has a key card that will access your room. So what do you do at night? You close that swinging door bar on your hotel door, and you override their security, and now you control who gets through that door and who does not. And we do exactly the same in SAP with Biolock. We allow you to position as many swinging doorbars as you want anywhere in your SAP system to protect and secure anything that you feel is sensitive to your organization. And how do we protect or open the swinging doorbell? Well, very simple. We talked about the Siemens ID mouse. Of course, now we moved on. We have advanced fingerprint technology. We work a lot here with Secugin, very inexpensive and high quality devices available around the world. We work with keyboards. We have implemented Fujitsu Palm Vein. So now you can just hold your hand over the scanner for either very high secure applications or just when a lot of users are sharing one PC. And then we have also integrated the NIMI band. And this is basically, I call it biometrics for gloves. It's used a lot in pharma, so people can authenticate while they have gloves on. But then we also, for larger rollouts, integrated with the existing Windows 10 or Windows Hello mechanisms. So if you're using Windows 10 and you smile in the camera in the morning to log on to Windows, you can use the same mechanism to approve a purchase order deep down with SAP by using Biolock and our connector to Windows Hello. Now, if you're already dealing with a single sign-on Active Directory, you have other EIM compliance strategies in place, all these generally happen outside SAP. So compared to this airport where we're comparing the SAP login with the security checkpoint, all other activities generally sit outside SAP or before you log on. Everything that we do is inside SAP. It's inside SAP's ABAP code or after you log in. And that means that we generally play very nice with any existing activities together and seamlessly take over. So staying with this example, back before 1972, you could walk to the counter, kind of like the SAP logo, get your ticket and walk right into the plane. Well, after the first hijacking, which ironically ended exactly where I'm living right now in Oak Ridge National Laboratory, they switched it, and we now have the security checkpoint that we all know about, where you need to show your ID to an officer, and they will uniquely identify you before they let you in the secure area after, of course, searching your bags. But they will also put your ID on a specific scanner. And that scanner will check if you're on a terrorist watch group or on a no-fly list. Or in the US, I could be on TSA pre-check, which allows me to go through the faster line. And we do exactly the same in SAP. We check ID, and then we check specific allow list or deny list for the function to further narrow down who will get access. And we can do this in 4 different application areas. So the first one is the most important one, and we will mostly focus on that. That is the function protection, to lock down every single part of SAP for the users that use SAP all day long. Then we also have the logon protection. And a few of our customers use that exclusively to use biometrics to log on to SAP, mostly after one of the top 5 auditing firms told them they can't sign off on the audit because they have analyzed that too many people on vacation sign on to the SAP system. So they had to put this in place in order to be compliant. The third application is employee verification, meaning employees that don't even know that SAP exists because they drive a truck, they work in the warehouse, they work in the mine, but we can still use it for time and attendance, employee checkup. We can use it for people being rehired and many different application areas. And then the application 4, you guessed it right, is the customer verification. Since you have customers and you might be business partners or so in your SAP system, we can assign a biometric template and then uniquely identify them when they come in the bank, when they get an operation in the hospital, or when they check out at the retail store. They could pay with their palm vein or the fingerprint without even bringing their wallet. But we want to focus on the first different areas because these are the important ones to focus on first to prevent the fraud. So let's get started with the SAP logon. We all know the yellow sticky note where the password is written down. Shoulder surfing actually is a thing. People look over each other's shoulder and look at the password. And then hackers don't do anything else but running a password sniffer or keylogging software and then find out user credentials to create those ransomware attacks that we have seen in the news. My favorite is still the logon field in the SAP GUI, where if you type your password in the user field accidentally in the morning, it is being stored. So you click backspace, you see the user IDs and the password, and you can log right in. And that unfortunately happens at most companies. If you want to give it a try, it's actually pretty scary. So after the Biolock is deployed, very simple. You do the same thing. You type in the user ID and the password, but then the little window pops up and say, put your finger on. True 2FA, two-factor authentication. We have been doing it since 2002, actually 2001, and now it's finally becoming a thing. But since we had a head start, we are going much further. We can also protect any of the tens of thousands of SAP transactions, and we can do that very, very simple configuration. We've actually created an Excel spreadsheet that we can share just to get people started brainstorming with a couple of hundred transactions that our customers have protected over the years, like everything from creating a vendor, moving goods, payments. And my favorite now is BP, maintaining a business partner, which really SAP merged about a dozen really sensitive transactions into one. So protecting this one is a really, really good idea. And we can do this to SAP standard transaction, but also to all your custom transaction. And we protect them via simple configurations. So in this case, no programming is required. We can also do this with all the HR info types or all the tens of thousands of SAP tables, like a customer list, for example, that might want to be protected. But the most important part is that we can go down to the field and function level and put our swinging doorbell right into a button, like an enter button, a save button, a print button. And what that does, I will explain this in the next slide here, very simple. When Edward Snowden downloaded all the data from the NSA, he went to save list local file after pulling up the table, put the smart drive in the USB port and click the generate button. And at this point, our ID check will come up and say, identify yourself. Now, if Snowden would put the hand on the scanner, it would probably identify him since he's part of the system and say, wait, you're Snowden. You are not specifically on the allow list to steal all our NSA data. So we will reject the process. And the same second, we will send an email notification to the entire security team. So not only have we identified the intruder, we have stopped the intruder, and we have alerted security all at the same time. And that is much more powerful than finding out 6 weeks later that somebody might have breached the network or looked at some sensitive data. We are here to stop it, prevent it, and identify the intruder. and take immediate action. And since Tomas has been talking a lot about payments, payments is, of course, a very high thing that our customers protect. This is actually an example from one of the oldest central banks in the world that has been using the technology for 15 years. And what they're doing is very simple. They say, every payment under 10,000 euros, we don't care. All our users, per example, 100 that have SAP roles, can issue that payment up to 10,000 euros. If it goes over 10,000 euros, the Biolock is being triggered, and now all of them can put their finger on the sensor, or they don't even have to, but only 30 of those 100 who are our most trusted users will be able to issue a 16,000 euro payment. All the other ones will be denied. So in the future, they won't do it anymore, but it gives you good control to really narrow things down and enforce the least privileged access. And we can do the same with masking or hiding fields. This is a big deal to comply with GDPR. You have to protect the data. You're responsible that your customers' data are not being accessed, like social securities or birthdays or credit cards. So we do the same thing. We simply say that is okay. Everybody that has SAP roles can see that screen, but only 10 people that are specifically invited can see the PII, the personal identifiable information. And we also use this a lot in the government to hide PM notifications, like functional locations. You could be hiding the Coca-Cola recipe or anything else that is sensitive for you, so you don't get in trouble or you have compliance violations. And Tomas also mentioned in the preview the digital signature. This is a big deal. We have installed this especially due to COVID, at many pharma companies around Europe. They have to do the digital sign-off, and back then it was like 5 times a day. Now they have to do this 25 times an hour, like re-entering the username and the password. And we added the biometric factors, so instead of taking 10, 15, 20 seconds to do this every time, they just put the finger on the sensor or hold the hand on the scanner, and in less than a second, it is done. So the time savings and the user convenience alone is incredible. Now, since a lot of the people have gloves on, let's get back to this band. If you can see my video here, this is a NIMI band. It has live detection built in. So in the morning, when I'm getting ready for work, I put it around my arm. I put the finger for 10 seconds, and it will register me as Thomas. Now, if I do as much as loosen the band or take it off, it will shut off immediately. But let's assume it stays on. It's still Thomas. Now I put gloves on. I can put a full hazmat suit on. And all I need to do is tap this against an NFC reader to approve the digital signature in SAP. This is currently, it's not a prototype. It's actually being rolled out at a couple pharma companies right now, and I'm hoping that one of them is actually making us a video right now, so we can share it with you if you're interested in that. Another case study that I want to discuss quickly is fast user switching. Now, a lot of companies run SAP in a warehouse or a scenario where there are multiple people that share one PC somewhere in the corner, and they are supposed to log in and log out all the time before they do something, and there's not enough time in the day to do it. So what we have come up with is we create a generic SAP ID, like a warehouse PC1 and PC2 and PC3, and now we assign the 10 people that are supposed to work in this warehouse with their biometric credentials to those generic IDs. And in this case, we've actually built a lot of kiosks. We built kiosks with fingerprint sensors built in, palm vein scanners built in, and people just walk up to that kiosk and they hold their hand on the scanner and they do a transfer order. And then they walk away, nothing else to do. The next person who's already behind them wants to do an inbound shipping, will hold their hand over the scanner, and it is done. It is very convenient, And it's also very secure because the computer always stays unlocked. But if a truck driver walks into the warehouse, well, they can't do anything because they don't have a biometric credential enrolled. So very convenient, very fast, and very secure. This is just, since we don't have the time to go into Biolock itself, once you start Biolock, which is inside your SAP system, you see 24 of extensive configurations, options, you have tables, you have exceptions. It is far above and beyond a simple single sign-on. There's actually all kinds of things that you can configure, and if you come up with something new, well, we're always adding customer requests as we go along. Now, let's talk about our 5 levels of protection that we have been talking about. It starts with the logon protection, of course, just to reiterate what we already discussed, but in sequence. So user types in the username and password. It goes inside SAP. You see, here's our Biolock. We have our own namespace /realtime. So you will type in /realtime /Biolock. And now it will check ID, which is step 1. We'll come back. Person puts the finger on or holds the hand on the scanner, and it goes back and it says the biometric reference template was recognized. And now it goes to step 2 and checks the deny list and the allow list to specifically further narrow down if this person can access the function. And by the way, just in case that isn't clear, we never take the actual fingerprint. We extract minutia points, which are little points on your finger, the same at the hand. On the fingerprint, we actually have about 30 to 70 unique points. On the palm vein, we have about 5 million. So we take those points, we create an encrypted template, and then that is what we match against. But your fingerprint or an image of it is never stored, which is why we don't have any issues with compliance or GDPR. So the protection number 2, transaction lockdown, just want to show you how simple this goes. We go into our Biolock and configure a function, in this case 470, and we want to use this to lock down an F1110 payment transaction. And now we say we want to have it globally protected, and we want to specifically allow people, and we choose our inspection feature. How do we open that swinging doorbell? And you see here we have a new Secugen fingerprint client that we recently built. We have our original fingerprint scan. We have passwords, logging only, palm vein, Windows Hello, NIMI band, all kinds of authentication options. And the reason why I'm diving a little deeper into this is biometrics advances. Biolock's value proposition. We have the control center inside SAP. If you come 2, 3, 5 years from now and say we're using this brand new face recognition system to do time and attendance and log into our doors, and we want to use this with Biolock, well, if there's a project behind it, we can add this to the list. Or if they finally develop that human odor scanner, where a scanner can smell you like a dog and say, yes, I know that this is Bernadetta. So we can add different modalities here as we go along, and we have done that over the past couple of years. But now that we have set this up, which took us about 30 seconds to define this first line, I go in the second table, and I now say my transaction F1110 is assigned to 470. And now I click the Save button, and it is protected. But now I still have everybody that has SAP roles for F1110 and biometric credentials being able to access that function. And that is not good enough for us. And this is why we go into our next table and we say that function 470, the only people on the allow list are Smith and Tomas. And now I can guarantee the CEO that Smith and Tomas are the only 2 people in the world that will ever be able to get into the F1110 SAP transaction. And that is a very powerful statement to make because so far nobody was able to do that. But then again, we said earlier, this is not good enough. What does it matter to protect the F1110 transaction if we know that Tomas loves his coffee and he gets up all the time to get a coffee, and now everybody can jump on his PC? So we take it one step further. We protect the function 471 to execute the payment. We do the same settings, and now we need to dive a little deeper, get an ABAP programmer, and add this little piece of code via a user exit or field exit right before that enter button, and then link it to our function 471, which is now controlling that swinging doorbell 471 out of our Biolock control center. And with that, we have locked it down on the function level, and now once the payment is triggered, the ID check will come up. And the protection level 4 now narrows this down even further. We use this a lot in countries like Africa to reduce corruption and collusion, because we don't even trust that one authorized user that we have given SAP permission, Biolock permission, and a biometric template could turn into a bad apple and send the millions of dollars to the Grand Cayman Islands. So we say here, we create what we call a dual confirmation group, for example, for payments over 100,000. And now we say if a payment over 100,000 is triggered, it takes 2 people. So you see here, Smith is requesting to execute that $150,000 payment, but now he needs to get April Miller to reconfirm it. And now April has to be on the same PC, put her finger on the device, and now the payment is being sent out. So we are really enforcing the 4 eyes principle, the 2 signatures on a check inside the SAP system. And this is also really great if you are dealing, for example, with transactions like OOCU_RESP, where you change responsibilities for people. You want to make sure that one single person cannot do this by themselves, because it would be a clear violation of SODs, really, which brings me to the next slide. You're all familiar, or most of you are, with SOD, segregation of duties, especially after Sarbanes-Oxley and Enron went down in the United States. It started coming up that one single person could not create a purchase order and then approve the purchase order and then issue the payment. These are conflicting business transactions that one single person should not be allowed to do. And there are technologies in place. There is software. There is SAP GRC, which used to be Versa, and they focus a lot on preventing this. And then, of course, there are other technologies. So what do? When Edward, he would never create a purchase order and approve it under his own user profile anyway. He will look over Werner's shoulder and approve it as Werner, and then he find a way to log in as Thomas and issue the payment. And when it ever blows up, then nobody could point fingers at him. And we've had many cases. The best known one is probably UBS PaineWebber, where the guy cost millions of dollars of damages, and everybody know he did it and why he did it, because he didn't get his bonus. But his lawyer used the Sadi defense. Some other dude did it, and he established that 15 people had the password to the account that was used, and therefore they couldn't convict the client. And that is why the biometric comes in, because now he doesn't have a chance to log in as Werner, but also if he does something by himself, we actually have biometric proof that he did it and why he did it. Now, what's the main advantage of Biolock? Only allowed users are accepted. Before Biolock, as we have established, many authorized, unauthorized users can theoretically access any function in SAP and cause damages, as seen in the news very often. After Biolock, with basically using the second biometric factor, we can guarantee that only Smith and Tomas, of course, who specifically permitted via Biolock, will be able to execute the function. And that means without the second biometric factor, all the others are always rejected. Like the secretary that has the password to the executive, the colleagues that share passwords, the hackers that come in and breach the network, but also our trusted administrator profile that every company is afraid of, because not that they don't trust the 3 administrators that they have assigned, but they know if the password falls in the wrong hands, a lot of damages can be done. And that can be reiterated and proven by the Biolock log file, the clear accountability. Here we can see for the first time, we see here the SAP user ID, which is Smith and Jones. And I always refer to this as a NASA spacesuit. Really, like every James Bond movie, he takes somebody's suit and walks out of a tricky situation. And just because the suit says it's Smith, it doesn't mean that somebody else like James Bond is using it, just like an SAP user profile. So here, for the first time, we have a Biolock user ID, which generally should match one-to-one the SAP ID. And for the first time, you actually see Thomas Smith, first name, last name, and you see he was accepted. And this is really all you want to see. What you don't want to see is where that Edward Snowden was on Mr. Smith's PC, actually stupid enough to put the finger on the biometric sensor, so he was uniquely identified. Then the fraud attempt was shut down, and the email notification went out to the entire security team, telling them that Edward Snowden is sitting on PC 375 trying to do an unauthorized payment right now. So we can take action right now. But we also have Amanda Jones here logged in as Jones, not being authorized. Well, can you guess why? Simple. She was not specifically on Biolock's allow list. So even she had the SAP permissions, Biolock shut her down and says, sorry, you're not invited, so you can't do it. And then in the next line, we see, well, nothing. This is because this is where the hacker hacked into the system, breached the network, found out Matthias' credentials, logged in, but again, was immediately rejected due to the fact that there wasn't even a biometric device detected. Nevertheless, no template detected, so we can't tell who the hacker was, but we rejected the attempt. And as we have a different return code here, we actually didn't only send that email notification to the SAP security team, but also to the network team, because they know they have an external breach that they might want to potentially investigate. And then last but not least, to finish this up, here we have Bongani. He's logged in as DDIC, the god of the administrators. And even as the administrator, he is not authorized to execute a payment. And that should come as a big relief for most SAP companies, because they can finally curb the power of the administrator in the production system when it comes to sensitive functions. Well, the icing on the cake really quick here is there's no training required. The only thing that the users do different than before is they might have to provide a biometric credentials. They have this little window pop up, please scan your finger to continue. This can be translated in any language in the world, Polish, of course. So you don't have to worry about any training. They just click on it and then they're done. And the technology is installed around the world. We have a lot of use cases in banking. Finance is a big concern. But of course, also a lot of companies that have nothing to do with banking, like, for example, Consol Glass, the largest glass manufacturer in Africa, who has been using the Biolock in SAP Finance for over 10 years now for outgoing payments. And that's all they do, is they make sure that every financial transaction in the system is controlled. But then again, we can use it for other things, like, for example, HR requests. Tremendously sped up the process when people were requesting vacation we did the sign off. They had to put the finger on the sensor, so we know that the person that is actually taking vacation is doing it, and it's not just a colleague doing a prank on them. And we sped up the process tremendously. They had an old paper process in place that was sped up from 1-2 weeks just to less than a day. Then we also see a lot in retail. We talked about this is actually in Germany, Raiffeisen, a big retail. They use SAP at cash registers, and they do payments or purchase orders right out of the SAP system. And they have the scenario with the fast user switching where a few hundred cash registers switch in between the actual machines, and they just simply put the finger on the sensor and they have full accountability. And in this case, it actually matches the sales receipt directly to the log file. So we have full accountability for everything. And we can talk about this a little bit more in the brainstorming. If you have other questions or specifically want to talk about your industry, to finish this up here, just as a summary, we discussed that we have 5 additional levels of SAP HANA. I want to point this out: security in the system, which goes from the logon protection, the granular controls, then the accountability on the function level, reducing the corruption and collusion with the dual controls, and then last but not least, reinforcing the SADs, preventing circumvention with the biometrics down on the actual level. Now, how can we help your company become more secure? Well, very simple. We check the ID for all employees. We can check it for vendors. We can check it for customers. We set unlimited security checkpoints, AKA those swinging door bars. We only allow access after the confirmed ID check. And with that, we have full accountability and controls in the log files, which is very important for your compliance. So really what we do is we control the weakest link in security, which really always ends up being the human being. And with that, I would like to open this up to brainstorming. I hope I stayed here in the time frame, gave us a couple extra minutes. Hopefully I've written down some questions, so please feel free to ask them in Polish, and Tomasz will be glad to translate forward and backward, and we'll have a little discussion here, hopefully.
Thank you, Tomasz. I see that we have initial question in English regarding the testing. How can we go? Which approach can we choose in order to test the solution, and how does a POC looks like?
Oh, that's a really good question. Very simple. We offer a pilot installation, a proof of concept. So very simple. We can install the full Biolock version in the sandbox directly at the customer, and then choose the biometric devices you can procure locally, like a SecHugin device or a palm vein scanner, 1, 2, 3. And then we will help them to basically establish or protect some of the functions that they are interested in. And then they can test it for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks in their own system with their own data, get the users familiar with it, let them fall in love with it, and then we can move on from there.
Okay, another question, can it be then split at some users with a POC and some without?
Yes, of course. That's a really good question. When we were doing the configuration, some people might remember behind the function there was a button saying a global check mark. And that should normally only be set once we are in production and live and up and running, because once we click that button, the function is protected for every user in the system. Before we go live and while we are testing, we will manually assign the function and say, that function 471 for the outgoing payment is only protected for Tomas and for Mr. Smith, and all the others work just as they do before, because Tomas and Smith are testing this in the sandbox right now.
Okay. Question regarding SAP version, which is required for Biolock.
Oh, I don't know if it still works, but I remember installing Biolock on an ERP 40B a very long time ago. Now we are anything ERP 4.7, newer HANA is absolutely supported.
Okay. How about availability for SAP Fiori tiles?
We have done some prototypes with Fiori and built the Biolock trigger into the Fiori tiles, so the communication is working. So far, no customer has jumped on this and rolled this out into a production or actually in a live environment. I am waiting for that because I'm personally very eager to see that working as well.
Okay. Is there any other questions? Yes, there is one. Which of the tools that you have just presented would be the most adequate for securing high amounts of financial transactions, and another one for warehouse employees? Could you please get back to this and give the name of the specific tools?
Yes, so this is basically, we'll go probably all the way back to the beginning. The tool is the Biolock. That will never change. The suggestion to protect the financial transaction is exactly this here. My suggestion would be to protect the financial transaction on the transaction level, like we have done here, by protecting the F1110. We also have customers, for example, one large oil company in Africa. They protect a transaction called the BNK_app, which is a batch payment triggering super large payments from the bank, from payments that were basically previously accumulated. And here we are not only using the dual confirmation group, but they are also using the SAP digital signature combined with Biolock and the dual confirmation group.
So I would additionally answer for that. There is only one tool. Yeah,
there's only one tool. Yes.
It depends on what use case scenario you want to use. Yeah, and based on the scenario, we can just implement or configure existing scenarios.
Yes, that is correct. But then again, in finance specifically, we would also go down to the function level, which is this scenario, because again, the most important part is not who's accessing the transaction, it is who is actually sending the payment out, who is pulling the trigger and pressing the enter button when the payment is sent. And this is where we go in. So really, to answer the question, it is a combination out of 2, 3, and 4 to really lock down the finances the right way. And we can schedule with the person who's asking the question an offline session to discuss this in detail, perhaps show it to them in our SAP system, and then see how it might apply to them. And then there was also a quick question, warehouse employees. The warehouse employees was the scenario where we assign the different users, and this is done really via the biometric assignment. We have generally, when we assign a biometric ID, we would say Tomas SAP ID is Tomas J, and we would assign the biometric ID as Tomas_J. And in normal scenarios, there should only be a one-to-one assignment, because other than a secretary officially working with the executive's SAP ID, we don't want any exception. The only exception here is really the warehouse PCs, where we would assign manually the Biolock IDs to the warehouse PC. And there's also a lot of exception, a lot of additional configuration that we could discuss with the interested person offline or in detail.
Okay. Another question regarding, do you have any document that could gather the most important business cases, scenarios?
Yes, we actually do. We have, we're just working on a document that has really a problem solution document, where we, in very short, accumulate what problems have people had and how has the Biolock helped them to solve this problem. And we would be glad to share that document with anybody after the session, or as a PDF file or so.
Okay. We are waiting for another questions. I will switch to Polish. Jeśli jest potrzeba wyjaśnienia czegoś w języku polskim, to możemy zrobić albo na tej sesji, albo już na dedykowanych sesjach, jeśli będą Państwo zainteresowani.
Maybe one thing from my side about the installation. The installation is very straightforward. The Biolock is not a resource hog. Like, if we do a pilot installation, all it takes is really to install the transports in the sandbox, which is done by your basis administrators. And then we would jump on a Zoom session, and depending on your needs, we could quickly help you to configure the function that you want to protect. And then the next step is already to enroll the fingerprints or palm veins of the test users into the system and then start using it. So in SAP, we are used that projects takes weeks and months. This is more a matter of days, with very limited resources needed to get this up and running and then maintain it down the road. It really does run in the background and doesn't bother anybody.
Okay. I don't see additional questions. Maybe let's give a few more seconds. I will see if someone is writing in chat anything. If not, then we just can conclude this webinar and welcome you to directly contact us in order to do very direct presentation or workshops in your organizations. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you very much. You guys have a great day over there.
Thanks.
Bye.
Goodbye. Someone is writing. Maybe last questions. Thank you. Thank you, Axel. Have a nice day.